Muy bien, vamos empezando, que pasan unos minutos.
Let's now start. We are now 10 minutes late. Well, good evening, everyone,
Em, Benvinguts
and
a
welcome
aquest primer debat,
to the
aquest primer
first
d'aquest cicle
uh,
de debats,
red-green
de la
debate
primera
of this
tres que farem d'aquí
cycle of debates, the first one that we
a
will
acabar
organize
l'any.
from now until the end of the
Per
year.
tant, benvinguts i gràcies.
So, welcome and thank you for being
Aquests
here.
tres debats,
These three debates,
alguns que ja heu vingut, algun d'ells
some of you have
sabeu que
been here
són
already,
possibles
and they
gràcies
are possible
al
thanks
suport i la
to the support
col·laboració
and
i el
collaboration
lideratge de
and the
la Green
leadership
European Foundation,
of the Green European Foundation, with whom we've been working for years now. So, once again, it's a good moment to say thank you. One more case of this collaboration.
com heu vist al títol,
And as you could see in the title,
comentava abans amb els
I
ponents,
mentioned that before with the speakers,
ens hem posat una mica dramàtics o
we
no,
became a bit dramatic or
perquè
not,
el Pacte Verd
because
Europeu,
the European
parlant
Green
amb alguns
Deal,
i amb els
the big
ponents,
question that we're asking our speakers
podem
today,
reflexionar avui,
we
és
can think
està en
about
perill.
that. Well, is it in danger?
Per això portem
That's why
tres
we
ponents i una
have
quarta que
three
es
speakers and
connectarà
a
online,
fourth
tres aquí físicament i una
speaker
quarta
who's
que
connected
es
online with
connectarà des de
us,
Brussel·les, que us passo
connecting
a
from
presentar.
Brussels. And now I will
Tenim
introduce
aquí
her
a la
to you. Here
Rosa
we have
Martinez,
Rosa Martinez,
que és secretària d'Estat de Drets
Secretary of
Socials
State of
del
Social
Ministeri
Rights of the
Social i
Ministry
Consum
of Social
a
Rights,
l'Agenda
Consumption,
2030,
and
que ha sigut
2030 agenda.
presentada
She
i
was
votada al
amongst
Congrés i que actualment
other
també
in
és
charges
membre del
and
grup
positions,
negociador de Sumar. Voy a hacer
MP
currículums relativamente
at the
breves.
Congress of Spain.
De acuerdo,
She's also,
me voy a quedar con los
with
titulares.
Sumar. Well, just the headlines.
Tenim el
We
Mariano
also
Sanz,
have
que és
Mariano Sanz.
secretari
He is the
executiu de la
secretary
Confederal
of
de
the
Comissions Obreres,
Confederal Executive
responsable
of
de
Comisiones
Salut
Obreras
Laboral
Union,
i
responsible
Sostenibilitat
person of
Ambiental,
sustainability and
i
environmental
tenim a
health.
Xan Lopez,
And we have Xan Lopez,
entre altres,
who,
és membre del
amongst other
col·lectiu
things, is member
contra el
of
diluvio, també
a group called
editor de
Contra
la
el Diluvio
revista Corriente
and
Cálida
co-editor
i
of
persona que
Corriente
escriu
Cálida
habitualment
magazine,
sobre
and a person who normally
economia i
writes
canvi
about
climàtic. I
economics and
us
climate
connectarà, la
change.
volem
And we will now
que
have
es connecti, a la
uh,
Taube Van
Taube
Melkebeke,
Van
espero haver pronunciat bé, ja sabeu que
Taube
no és ben bé catalana,
Van Melkebeke. She's not
que
Catalan, as
és
you can see.
experta en clima
She's
i
an expert
pacte
in
europeu i és la
climate and
president adjunta
the
del Green
European
European
Green Deal policy
Foundation.
manager of the Green European Foundation.
I a vosaltres tres,
Well, I'd like to
primer de tot,
thank
volia
her for
agrair
being
la
here,
presència perquè
as well as the
de
three
fet
of
és el
you,
primer acte
because today is the first
que ha fet Taube de
event
Jones, on les
that
tres
Nurse
persones
Jones
no, creo que lo digo bien,
organized
ni han nacido ni viven en
have not been
Cataluña. ¿De
born
acuerdo?
nor live in
Entonces, primer
Catalonia.
porque va a ser un
I
acto
say that
básicamente en
because this will
castellano, porque
be
las tres
a
personas
Spanish-speaking event or English-speaking event,
hispanoparlantes y la Taube no,
and
no
Taube is
parlarà en
not,
anglès
she will be
ni
speaking in
català
English.
ni espanyola. Y yo os quería, para
And I
hacer la
wanted to, first
introducción
of
a la
all,
materia, comentaba este
start
título del
by
Pacto
saying that,
Verde
well, the Green Deal,
en crisis,
the Green Deal in
y
crisis headline.
porque
I say this
queríamos
because
empezar a mirar
we
hacia
wanted to
adelante,
start looking
no tanto hacer
forwards,
un acto de
not just
balance
organizing
o de
an
hacer
event trying to
o de
balance the situation
crítica
or
fiscalización,
criticizing
inclusive ahora con el Pacto
determining
Verde en sus
what has
aspectos
happened with the
políticas
Green Deal
públicas,
up
pero también
until
de
now,
movimientos
with
sociales,
social
la dimensión más amplia
policies and
posible,
social movements.
sino que
In the
hay una
widest possible
coyuntura
scope,
que se
there's
llama
a
elecciones
joint
europeas,
situation
hay unos
called European
derivados que se llama
elections. We
Comisión
have
Europea,
an
una Comisión Europea
element
que
called
lidera algunas
European
políticas
Commission that has led
de Pacto Verde Europeo,
policies in
algo
the
que podemos
Green
discutir, pero
Deal
ha sido
with results that we can talk
especialmente
about.
un
But
paradigma,
obviously,
¿no?
it's been
En
a
términos,
paradigm.
ha cambiado la Comisión Europea,
The,
es verdad que hay una
things have
comisaria que se
changed.
llama Teresa Rivera, que puede dar
We
algunas
have
ciertas
Teresa
garantías,
Rivera that gives us a certain degree of
al
guarantee,
resto de la comisión.
but there
Voy
is
a dar,
the rest of
voy
the.
a ser generoso porque he visto la
Well,
Comisión
let me
Europea,
be
me voy a quedar
generous.
con Teresa Rivera, la que podemos
And
criticar o no, pero que es verdad que
I
la
don't
Comisión
want to
Europea tiene un
criticize, but
sesgo
the
hacia la
European
derecha,
Commission is
hacia lo
biased towards the
rápido, que
right
incluye, entre otras
wing,
cosas, las políticas
including
medioambientales. Es verdad que no ha
environmental
empezado, pero
policies.
bueno,
It's true, it has not started yet, but
somos mayorcitos para ver
we
que
are old
hay
enough to
algunos casos
see
que
that
habrá
we
que
have
solucionar.
some
Entonces la
elements that will
pregunta
have to be
es un
determined.
poco a
And
partir
the
de
question
dónde, ¿no?
starts here.
Personas que conocemos,
You,
hemos
we
estado
all know,
interesadas o trabajando alrededor
and
del
we have
Pacto
been
Europeo,
working
pues
around the
desde muy
European
pequeños,
Green Deal,
desde el sindicato,
from the academia, from the
ese aquí
unions, etc.
un poco
What do
cómo
you
empieza,
see?
cómo debemos encarar una
How
segunda
should we
fase
face the
del
second
Pacto Verde Europeo. Es un
stage of
poco
the European Green
especulativo,
Deal?
pero
This
sería
is
un
kind
poco
of
la
speculative, I know,
introducción.
but that's our
Por
intention.
tanto, gracias
Therefore,
otra vez
thank
y
you
doy en primer
for
lugar
being here, and let me
paso
now give the floor
a
to
Rosa.
Rosa. Thank you, Rosa.
Gracias. Bueno,
Thank
gracias
you
a quienes habéis decidido pasar un
for
ratito de
deciding to spend some time with us in Tuesday evening talking about this Green Deal. Before analyzing the European Green Deal, I think it's important to determine three elements of analysis or diagnosis to see where we are standing on. Climate emergency is outside of the agenda, and it's out of focus. Beyond some heat waves and catastrophes, it's not part of our agenda. A couple of years ago, we could hear people talking about this, but this is not in focus. This is an added value because the Green Deal may be in danger. And well, you've had demobilization of tractors trying to find solutions, but not anymore. There's people are tired, and policies are tired as well. Obviously, this is being channeled by the far right, but the policy of dialogue and construction is parked. It's minoritary, and everywhere in Europe we see this. So it's a rationale of destruction, and the Green Deal is construction. So if we have a political concept of destruction, we have another extra risk. And then, beyond the political fatigue, this means the disconnection between citizens and politics, and this disconnection that can find answers in the far right, extreme right, because some people could find answers in a progressive set of movements. They say, no, I mean, I don't really care. So with these three elements, we see a way to try to recuperate the European Green Deal. The Green Deal includes three important elements because this is the tool, European tool to fight against climate change. This is dangerous. If it's in danger, it's dangerous as well. The second element, this is the plan with which Europe wanted to find a place back in the world, to find its protagonism, or recuperating, or maybe not being isolated, being outside of technological race, a race of hegemony. And thirdly, this meant a confirmation in the change of paradigm. There is a neoliberal model that led us back to a regulation, to more or less interventionist and progressist, but it was a change in the place that we were coming from. Therefore, the deal beyond the content, this European Green Deal, may be in danger, and that means a big danger for everyone. We are at the moment in which the climate struggle, it means also industrial policy. When we talk about ecological transition, we are speaking about industrial policy. We talk about ecological transformation. We talk about supplies, raw materials. We're not speaking about emissions, impact, adaptation. We're speaking about industrial policies. And this, on a European basis, has the dimension that we tend to forget about. So those that have been the engine of the European industry is France and Germany, and the risk is this should respond to the needs in France and in Germany, and not a strategic and common vision of all citizens in Europe. So if we use more or less state tools, this is the mechanism that we will use to support our green industry. Countries like France or Germany above all, with a big capacity of debt generation, and a strong state will privilege these industries as compared to other countries. Saying this in different words, if we don't see strategic European strategic industries, if they are not seen on a general basis, and we want to concentrate them in some countries only, all the work done in cohesion policies in the last few decades will be lost. Therefore, my first bet is that there is a political struggle, because this should be part of the European policies. An example, the Iberian Peninsula and in Serbia, we have the lithium mines, both places. If we want to exploit them, it is important that in these two countries, in these two regions, we leave part of all the added value of the production of lithium. That's the way to decentralize and create wealth with industrial policies all over Europe. We can speak about how standards are organized, but the question is, let's place our industrial policies where needed, not where the central countries want. Another element that is connected to industrial policies, and that's been one of the messages that the Green Party has campaigned these European elections, that we have to talk about Green Deal and Social Deal. Traditionally, the reluctances to eco-transformation come from the entrepreneurial world, from industry, business. Right now, most sectors, except for fossil fuels, have understood the importance of the eco-transition, but we see that the resistance comes from the social aspects, from society, and from what people understand that are losing. And in this last legislation, they understood this. The green vest, the yellow vest fight and struggle was part of the European Imaginarium. So in this legislation, we have tools that are not enough and that they're not covering all possibilities, like the Fair Transition Fund or mechanisms of compensation for LTS2. Well, all this means that there is an awareness, and we have to understand that we have to bring or consider the social element to the discussion. Social or fair transition that comes from the union world, that has been there for many years, and that we normally connect to work, how we accompany the different sectors, well, has a wider and growing dimension, because we talk about not only the social components, but we talk about the social transition, democratic transition, symbolic transition. There's a lot of stuff. There are four elements that we should start to consider when we speak about fair transition. First of all, impacts. Impacts hit the most vulnerable more than others. But the policies of urbanism, adaptation, etc., do not consider this vulnerability. And there we have the first question, the first issue where we have to put our focus on. Secondly, additional costs that transition means for many social groups. I think that this is the key of the transition. This means a fair distribution of costs and benefits. Who pays and who benefits from the transition? Because from the green and eco world, we've talked a lot about the benefits of transition, but we haven't talked about the distribution of these benefits, or at least we have not talked enough. That means economic benefits, a clear debate with all the renewable projects in the rural world, but also social benefits, who's socially benefiting from clean air with electric vehicles, or who's benefiting from sun panels, solar panels. All these elements are key. And here we have two elements: fiscality on the one hand, a fundamental element in the ecological transition. The green fiscality has to be a vector of transformation, but it needs to be done with a fair perspective. And obviously, we need programs of aids and support highly focalized, because we'll have people and groups who have to continue using fossil fuels. We have to see how we can support the decarbonization process, how people that can allow this can pay for this fuel, for these fossil fuels. And third element, accompanying the social sectors and employment. We have talked about all the employment, all the job positions that will be generated, but these jobs won't be generated in the same areas where they are destroyed, and people who come from a sector won't be able to join the new sector. So this job creation has limits. And here we have the fourth element into consideration. When we talk about fair transition, we have to think about social policies. How can we design these social policies that are flexible, that can be implemented into territories where, we have an effect? Why not a universal income in an area of mining? Why don't people that have a problem in their companies can have special policies that can accompany them and support materially people in need, people that have to be that suffered in the transformation processes. And obviously we could open up a deeper debate talking about social policies. Well, I mean, we have to support people, and then we could also talk about the role of investment in public services connected to transition. For example, in the rural world, this is fundamental. Beyond what we can do, investing in public services in the rural world is the big compensation that we can organize for the transformation of many things. So let me finish by saying that there is a key role of rethinking the welfare state that we have been talking about for the last 80 years, something very basic that we've been updating and expanding, understanding that the welfare state has to take care of the contingencies of both climate impacts as well as the contingencies of social, economic, and productive transformation that include these climate policies. They have to protect, they have to give certainty, and this is something that they are not done. And I reckon that this role that we believe that the state should have during the transition is not only designing public policies, is not only guiding the economy, but also from a social perspective, it's key. It's a key role because having a wider perspective. In a nutshell, I believe, as I said, that what is at stake right now is politics with big capital letters. If we miss the Green Deal, we miss politics and policies. We have to have a possibility of generating policies on a mid and long-term basis. Doing politics doesn't mean working on a short-term basis and not generating controversy. And also, if we have a problem with green deals, we have a problem with society when we talk about transformation and country challenges, migration, aging, you name it. Obviously, we have political debates. Obviously, we have ideological debates. But above all, there should be a debate of public policies where solutions are. So the Green Deal is in danger, and this means that the concept of public policies is in danger in a concept where we go to narratives, simple solutions, and we are not talking about the real debate, the background debate. It's also all the independency of lobbies and pressure and groups are at stake. Well, groups that are interested in the well-being and that are supporting democracy. And let me finish with a consideration. All this political context negates the frailty of our societies. We are at a frail society from the vulnerability of our bodies. We're talking about with Laya, seeing the public policies on aging should be priority, the frailty of our society, of our economy, the impacts of climate change, and the frailty of politics altogether needs to be important enough as to fight for a European Green Deal. But if we have to have a European Green Deal, well, we should be changing the framework of action. And this is it for the moment. Thank you. Good enough. I will try to, complement what was just said by my colleague. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure to be here with you. Some of the issues that you are considering include general elements that we should also tackle, because now I'll talk about the European Green Deal. But here we have elements that are above our heads. At one point or the other, we have to think about, because they cause part of the situation we have. Globalization is one of them, the model of globalization we have. If we had to rethink the model of globalization that we have seen that fails, and that doesn't really work, and how many of the European policies are imploding and conditioning markets and societies. And then we have the model on development. We have another debate, which is not the subject of this debate, but it's a key element, the model of development, economic development we have right now. Is it good enough to set the limits so that the planet can survive? Probably not. And I believe this consideration, which is much bigger and much wider, should be present in our heads. We live at the moment in which, are of unrest, moments of uncertainty, not only at a European level, but globally. We have to consider that. Keep it in mind. We have a war in Ukraine that conditioned importantly with our European Green Deal. It's also true that it had good basis, but that it had some elements that had great weaknesses. We have the Gaza war that is having important repercussions, and it's also showing how small we are when considering injustice and the little capacity we have of changing this situation. But also, we are at a moment in which in Europe, we also have a crisis. More and more countries, want to be independent from Europe, don't love Europe. And one of the key elements to face seriously and with a European spirit is the coordination and cooperation. France and Germany have always been the motors of industry, the drives, and they have to be, but maybe we have to develop other complementary activities so that their needs can be covered, our needs can be covered. And this cross-sectional and global vision, well, I don't see it. I see maybe state policies that go, and that place their positions in the general context. And this situation maybe is not a good reference for us at the times we are living in. And then we have a situation when facing some transitions that have been very intense. We're not only speaking about the ecological transition dash energetic transition, because the gate of this transition is energy, and then we see how the incidence on energy generation technologies has an importance in the elimination of greenhouse greenhouse effect gases. Digitalization also represents in the labor sphere disruptive elements of an important nature. It's also affecting intensely many sectors that will have to be adapted. And the tools are maybe not or are not based on what I would call the fair transition. Well, planning is key. Because as we said before, when we talk about the European Green Deal, we are imagining a story that the most powerful effects can happen in the mid-long term, maybe leaving a better future for our grandchildren, not even children. But we realize that facing this situation maybe is not having the necessary intensity. We need these transitions to be more or in better coordinated than planned. And in that context, we should have some rules and legislations that are stable, that have a capacity so that we can develop mid to long-term projects without having the uncertainty that maybe changing governments can change them. Also, these processes that are disruptive generate transitions we have faced because we know it very well firsthand. We know the transitions that are being developed in the field of energy because the fair transition plans that have been formulated took place when closing charcoal mines, where before we had reconversion plans. When we speak about the fair transition processes, it's important for us to create a parallelism with reconversion plans. They have substantial differential elements that force, in one way or another, investments to be oriented to changing the model, not giving money to administrations so that they make investments. For example, you talked about Asturias in the mines. Well, they have excellent roads and excellent airports and 11,000 million euros since 1990s, but we have been unable to change the model. We haven't been able to change the model because we didn't have the capacity of leading the activities that had to take place to face that model change. And transitions, well, for example, thermal energy, closing on the plants. And we also have repercussions because people think that they have lost quality in their society and lives. We cannot live in a context where we have winners and losers. the social response, as you said, but this takes place in the sphere of energy. But we have other spheres, such as agriculture. That is very important. Then, in that respect, what will be the plans that will be developed in order to convince those people that play a key role, because they have to change their attitudes? When we're speaking, well, a third aspect, let me put it this way: the third aspect is what kind of a European Commission we will have. What will happen? Considering the European Commission, well, this will give us what the tailwinds will be like. We have the Draghi report. In the Draghi report, we have things that can be positive and can help the European Green Deal, but we have other elements that do note the regulation and the decrease, the gentrification of the regulations on this. Well, normally this affects in a greater flexibility so that things happen in a way that is maybe not the most correct way. Then we will see what is being observed. When we talk about fair transition, which is a very important thing in the labor sphere, we talk about four aspects that are fundamental for us. Before facing these transition processes, we have to understand the measures to help and support those that are going to be affected. We cannot just close down a facility without considering and determining an agreement with the workers' representatives and the administration, well, having established some regulation plans and job regulations, because these people will be affected. But secondly, we should follow at the same time a plan to comply with some political and strategic measures to guide the model that we want. Secondly, we should have a model of requalification, of training. We should have funding, good funding. We should have greater R&D and I and investment. We depend on this because of the big companies, and we show off and boast that we say we have very advanced technologies in energy, but they belong to the big companies. They are not our own technology, because we refuse to invest in that situation that will help us in a situation of privilege, considering the plans that need to be developed. Thirdly, we have planning. Planning means that we can have the capacity to reach global agreements and having stable regulations, so that when we or another, we all can start from a common base. For example, we have a clear example here in the year 2008, when observing the renewable energies. Well, we went back to the previous steps. Here we'll need a great deal of investments, not because Draghi says so. We need public investments, and we will need private investments. And if you don't have a stability from the regulatory sphere, it won't be possible for us to capture this type of investments. And everything has to be regulated and well addressed. We have many funds that are very important, and that have to be controlled from a perspective of what you spend the money in, and that the projects that you invest in follow the guidelines observed in the European Green Deal. These elements are absolutely fundamental. Then we have another element, which is another threat. We are now facing elements of the extreme right, far wing, that are male chauvinists, homophobic, negationists, and they change reality and at your will. And this is an element that is also some groups feel fed back when rejecting an element that goes against everyone. And we have more problems. We have to create a difference between the perception that people have in cities and people in the rural area. What is affecting their processes of transition? These processes of transition take place in the rural areas so that people in cities can benefit. Mobility is another element. Mobility affects big cities, okay? Mobility plans, how can they reach the rural area? I am from Castilla-León, a very unpopulated area. When I go to Madrid, man, Madrid is huge. Madrid can organize mobility very easily, but how can I help people from a little town in Leon, lost place in the mountains? How can they organize public transportation? They think that that they are not the beneficiary of all these policies. With other elements, and I will stop here, other elements that will be key, such as, for example, now we are speaking about this water. Water is a key element. Water will be an asset that will create very important conflicts. And I believe in the short rather than the long-term basis, it's a limited resource. It's not really well managed. It's managed on demand, and those that lead it well, a mafia. They're a mafia, a local mafia, not Italian mafia. Starting with the water association, the watering associations. Well, we are not doing it right, but I believe that one of the fundamental keys is to approach these groups and people so that people, unless they are committed with the commitment to a process of transition because they believe that this is an improvement for their lives, well, it would be hard for us to help them with the intensity that we need and with the certainty in time that I believe are a key element. Period. I stop. Thank you for this kind invitation, and I'd like to thank you all for also joining us. Many of the things that I would intend to talk about have been already said, but I hope that repetition helps and not makes you tired. I want to observe three main trends that we have in the European Green Deal. One fundamentally positive, the other is tremendously ambiguous, and the other fundamentally negative that works as the limit. And then maybe proposing some ideas that can be interesting to, fight the fight. The first trend won't surprise anyone, the positive one, the one that is supporting the European Green Deal, which is the climate and ecologist movement that had a spectacular power and strength before the pandemic with the Green New Deal, the report of the IPCC of 1.5 degrees, that politically was very important. And that in Europe, but this meant the European Green Deal that initially was a proposal, I think that was quite ambitious and positive, and that gathered some elements that had been, fought with great power and interest in the social movements. But it was stopped by the beginning of the pandemic and the further crisis. I think this is a fundamentally positive trend. I think that it has some problematic aspects that I'll talk about now, and that now was not that popular anymore with less power it had years ago. This is the next element, the next trend that I think is very ambiguous is the evolution of the European Green Deal from then on. Is greatly influenced by the pandemic and the war in Ukraine and in Europe, which basically is the rationale of the national security and industrial and entrepreneurial competitiveness. I believe that this is what makes the European Green Deal, be deeply rooted and increasing their ambition budgetarily and in the incidence of the industrial and political incidence of the European Union. Then in that respect, it's positive because we are not abandoning the green and climatic axis of these policies, but it's displacing the center of gravity of these policies to aspects of national security, strategic autonomy, industrial and entrepreneurial competitiveness. I believe it's important to say that this happens on a green framework that was there, and we thought that struggle wouldn't have been impossible. But we have a recent report, the Draghi report is a perfect example. This, if you read not the full report, but the summaries of the report, you'll see that implicitly we have green policies, but it's addressed or directed by other ideas that are fundamentally ideas of competitiveness or not allowing Europe to fall in their balance of power with other powers. This is a very ambiguous trend because some elements are necessary to continue advancing and other are dangerous, like elements of national and military security. And finally, the last trend, which is fundamentally negative and that works as a limit to the European green policies, is the increase of the right wing and the new ecological negationism. I call it the new negationism because it's evolving or mutating from a negationism of the climate crisis or ecological crisis itself. But now we are maybe talking about a ruthless struggle against many of the ideas for progress, conflicts in the rural world, mobility in transport, in the energy production, etc. So I believe that here what's really operating, and this is a much wider phenomenon that is having to do with many of the conflicts that we heard before about. It's drifting of low social trust. It has to do with the process of a long-term process of collapse. Intermediation authorities have been affected by that, and this causes the process of negative polarization, theories of conspiration, dimensional and personalized conflict that are very popular in almost the economic nationalism, anti-migratory policies, new wars and invasions and genocides that we are witnessing. I believe that all this political drifting has a certain origin in that low social trust. People don't trust in the promises that are made politically by unions, political parties, etc. Let's continue fighting. And proposals that are conspiratory, conspiranoic policies from the right wing. So they say, well, they come to your country, they want to steal the very little you have. Don't let it happen. Well, in my experience, a way to intervene in these conflicts is that oftentimes different things are mixed with new, old, true, false elements, hard to separate. A very clear example is territorial conflicts related to renewable energies. Some people have some important reasons for not trusting on how things are doing, benefits that will be reverted on people living in those areas. But this combines questionable and untrue elements. It's difficult to see how we can intervene in these processes. Therefore, to finish this chapter, I would like to say that we have to think that only if we have powerful policies and having subjective and objective data that we can implement such well, facts will speak for themselves, and the best introduction to these conflicts is continuing our progress in public policies and social policies. And here I'm quite accepting with this. I think that data is not enough, and we have to invest in rebuilding those mechanisms of social intermediation and generating a meaning, because I believe that things on their own are never evident, and we have to have some kind of a organization, a well-structured organization to give a meaning to the processes that we're living in. That's my criticism to some of the positivism of some people that think that things will improve on their own. Let me finish with some ideas that can be interesting for the further debate. We were asked if we thought that the European Green Deal renewal is tactical or not. I think that there is an important reconsideration, sensitive element of the correlation of powers in favor of the European Green Deal in the European Union. But this has been the part of the project has been, we'll say, by the positive actions of von der Leyen and company. Well, there were some years of crisis that had an effect on this. This coalition has lost power, and there's an advance of a new negationism. So this change generates concerns to many. Paradoxically, what is positive, well, I call it a frail world. This is an echo of what Rosa just said. The eco crisis won't experience any changes it will go not better but worse. There are no positive changes, and they will have new opportunities that can be very dramatic for some of us, but that will allow us to continue advancing in the crisis and continue disputing the needs of progressing in climate and green policies in the European Union and in many other places. So, I don't know how I'm doing with respect to time, but yesterday I saw a fascinating example with respect to the infinite reproduction of unexpected crisis models, tough crisis. I don't know if you noticed that there's been a very important hurricane, Helene, I think it's called, in the U.S., with huge floods in North Carolina and other states. Well, in North Carolina, we have two quartz mines that produce a very high type of quartz, high quality, and they are so necessary to the world production of microprocessors. Well, these microprocessors require very pure quartz, and because of something I didn't really understand, they don't use synthetic quartz, but they use the quartz from the mines of North Carolina. So once the stocks are over, we'll have a new crisis in microprocessors. Climate change won't let us rest at any time. So I don't think these moments of unexpected crisis won't disappear. New risks will lead our ways. So my proposal on how to approach it all, I believe that we have seen certain limits, well, such as the Green New Deal or social movements proposals become or should become the center, the core of new policies. This had some successes and some limits as well. So we had to start expanding the political proposals of the coalition that we want to forge. I think that the worsening of the eco-crisis will bring lack of trust and uncertainty amongst the population. And I think that we should be capable of offering alternatives focused on the certainties and not uncertainty, while giving a level of trust to the general population. I believe that this type of ideas are not highly appreciated in progressive movements. We think that they are conservative approaches. I think that we have to break away with that method, with that taboo. I believe that we have to incorporate a conservative element to progressive policies, not conserving our environment for society, but offer certainty in an uncertain world. And up until now, this new negationism, this new extreme right wing are not doing that. Their policies are nihilistic in the conservative attitudes. So I think that window of opportunity is still open. We have to use it to our favor, and we have to expand this coalition behind the European Green Deal, strengthening the certainties in the uncertain world we live in. And that's it. We can talk about this after Taube Van Melkebeke, I'm sorry, this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. And it's an honor to speak after these true excellent interventions. I hope I can still bring any new ideas to the table, but I think I might, because I really yeah, I think I can follow very well on what was just said regarding the data, but also the use of data, and really being clear about where the problem sits, and thereby also trying to find where the solution might be. Because I think we all agree, right? The Green Deal is at risk. And we also have seen that in the European elections in June, but also across member states, across countries in Europe. Which we can also see now in the proposed commissioners. I think almost 70% comes from the EPP, which is the conservative group in the European Parliament. And despite some positive news, I think in some of the commission letters and the mission letters that were given to each of these proposed commissioners. For example, just transition commissioner under Teresa Ribera, but also I think a positive news was the kind of connecting of housing and energy. There's a few silver linings, but overall, I think we are looking forward to 5 difficult years. Despite the fact that the Green Deal is still there, as other speakers have mentioned, mostly from an industrial and a competitiveness framework, it's going to be difficult, I think, to further push for stronger climate action and stronger environmental action, which is actually what we would need. We don't need to just maintain it and make sure that the basis is there, but we actually have to accelerate. And that will be definitely very, very difficult in the 5 years, but not impossible, I would say. So I think because we have this huge problem, right? We have a Green Deal that is more doubtful at this point, that is definitely at risk. It's important to really, I think, go deeper into the diagnosis of this issue. Why did European voters vote very differently than in 2019? Why is there also just generally more backlash hearable and visible against the Green Deal? And I think it's, of course, a very, very complex issue. We have talked already this evening about the war in Ukraine, about genocide, about geopolitical tensions and competition, about social policy as well, and about inequality, which I think is really critical to the question here. But there's more. There's demographic change. There's the energy transition that is also really picking up with a different speed, right? We have already moved past the most easy stages of the energy transition. So we have seen some progress in sectors, while we see that, for example, for households and transport, there is still a huge way to go in the transition to renewables. So we see also that the next stage and the next years will be even harder in terms of the changes that need to be made in the EU and by households and citizens. So that's definitely also an important economic fact or economic and social factor to take into account. At the same time, we have had the Green Deal and we have the climate law, which also sets our ambition straight and which creates a sort of positive dependency, because we did see, despite the attacks on climate action and climate policy, that the Green Deal as such has survived the election and the rise of the far right. And that can have something to do with how Europeans actually look at the question. If you look at the 2024 Eurobarometer, for example, we see that the Europeans still see climate change and the environment as one of the key European priorities to address, with 33%, which is the same as irregular migration, which has been, of course, very much used by the far right in the last elections, and is higher than security and defense. So Europeans still see that climate and environment is a more important priority than, for example, security and defense for the EU institutions. At the same time, in the same survey, we see also that the war in Ukraine ranks the highest in terms of challenges that the EU is facing when it comes to how citizens look at the EU. And there we see that climate change and environmental issues are actually quite close as well. They have 35%. Interestingly so, the European citizens were also, by the Eurobarometer, asked what would be the most important issues that they would see or that they would want to see in the electoral campaign for the EU elections. And there we saw that poverty and social exclusion and supporting public health come up as the top ones, together with jobs and defense and security. So here we see a bit of a different kind of image, which kind of is again a very clear indication that social issues and health and also the welfare states, as Rosa also mentioned, are actually a key topic for politics in the next 5 years, and that it will be very important to be able to link also environmental and green policies towards those social exclusion, public health issues, as well as jobs, defense and security. I think in terms of the far right and the rise of the far right, the other speakers have also already correctly mentioned it. There's a clear capitalization of these feelings of social concerns and being left out. And we see also that they have very successfully used backlash against the Green Deal in a way of getting voters to go to the far right. I think they have capitalized very well the fears, but it's a very dangerous narrative, and it's also a completely unsustainable narrative, because of course, if we delay climate action and if we delay the Green Deal, Fit for 55 and coming legislation, it will continue to be hitting the poorest people first. So as a political strategy, it's also the most irresponsible thing that could have happened, and it's of course quite difficult to see here in Europe as well that now we have a very big fraction of the European Parliament being far right, considering also the challenges that this Parliament is facing in terms of social policy as well as climate and environmental policy. So my main point in this diagnosis, before also going into some of the lessons that we can learn out of this and how we can find responses to bring the Green Deal back up to speed, if we can say it like that, is that it's a complete mixed bag. So we have a lot of political wins, a lot of evolutions, a lot of defining factors. And we have a lot of political entrepreneurs, I think, that are pushing in different directions. We have indeed this competitiveness framework, which I agree is ambiguous. We can still work with it to some extent, but I think as a sort of end goal, it is very harmful. If we look at competitiveness, I think it can be a means to an end, the end being the well-being of people and the sustainability of Europe, but also of our planet. And the livability for all people on this planet. But competitiveness as such, I think we can reframe, and that will be a struggle in the next 5 years. But it is indeed not as bad as the third trend that the previous speaker mentioned. This kind of new what did you call it? Negationism. But here we have also, I think, tools to fight that. And I think it is about making sure that people also see the green transition as a movement, as a transformation that can also bring social benefits, and that also talks to the well-being of people, and that doesn't ignore other social services, but rather builds a bridge between ecological justice and social justice. And that's why I think also the Greens in the European Parliament, as well as in many member states, have been campaigning for a green and social deal. I think a lot of civil society organizations here in Brussels have done that as well. And the Just Transition Commissioner that we now have, I think, is also definitely a result of many campaigns pushing for these two agendas to merge together and to basically be the basis of more transformative thinking around the Green Deal, and thereby I think resolving kind of the issues that it has, right? Because why was it possible to campaign against this or against the Green Deal? Was because it had a lot of still very big gaps on social affairs and on social policy and on equality. So closing these gaps through a new green and social deal was the campaign towards the elections, and as well to the Commission. And although we have not seen this so much through the Commission mission letters, and that we rather saw a new competitiveness deal instead, I think it's the right way forward to maintain building these coalitions, as the other people also mentioned, maintain building a coalition between social justice actors, labor unions, feminists, human rights activists, etc. And at the other hand, the green movement, the classic green movement, but also new actors there, climate activists, the Youth for Climate, also here the Green European Foundation, were very much part of a lot of different alliances and networks to really make these bridges and to together push for a more transformative agenda, for an agenda that indeed also thinks about public services, that thinks about quality of work, quality of life, and not only about competitiveness. And thereby hopefully also can bring new life to the Green Deal, but not a Green Deal as such for the sake of a Green Deal, but as a green and social deal for global social and ecological justice. Thank you so much. I'll stop here.
I'd like to thank the four of you. We have a few minutes just in case any of you has a question, considering that we have one, two. We will need a microphone. Unless we have a microphone, we cannot hear the question. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, please. I read headlines that said something like, will the electric cars run over the European Green Deal? Why? Because it's an example, a pragmatic example of two or three things that have been said in several interventions. One is that the Green Deal starts from or it has to do with an industrial policy. And two, how do you redistribute the cost and benefits of the transition? And the electric cars are a proof to the citizens that read little and that hear little more beyond the TV news, that something's failing in this theory on how something should be, in that sense that the first thing that we notice, we citizens notice that well, any class, the workers class or any class, we had some social achievements that included, for example, mobility with a private vehicle that had a certain cost, 18,000 euros. Now you need an electric car that costs 45,000 euro with the equivalent functions, and you have not been able to manufacture it in Europe or manufacture them in Europe, but in China, the areas of low emissions are there. The tax on emissions, well, I'm being charged that, and so on and so forth. So the difficulty of understanding as the average standard citizen that all this works and that has been organized and created for the common wealth and the future of our generations, well, that's not so easy to understand, is it? It's not, because the first element that we are talking about, one of them is really clear to understand. Cars, electric cars. This is failing. And this is affecting all the Green Deal. It's questioning the ecological transition policies because it's not working well. And I'm not going on. I'm not going to go on because I would deliver a speech rather than ask a question. But I believe that there are so many contradictions that it's hard to approach the cost and benefits to the citizens, so that, the extreme right makes it possible to be negationist. Yeah, they'll force you to change your car and pay more taxes. Maybe your grandchildren, who know, have less contaminations in some areas of some cities where you're not living in because you had to move because you couldn't pay for the taxes. Very negative. It sounds negative. I'm sorry about that, he says. Following with the example of the electric car may be a problem to some to maintain the volume of private cars. Is it a challenge for the model change towards a more sustainable economy? In nuclear energy, the policies developed by France, they, sold it as a kind of a greenish energy production at least during the period of transition. It was included to consider it as energy for the sustainable transition. But what we're not hearing anything about, and that created many, many problems in the Green Deal, was when some people talked about the Green Deal and the mobilization of farmers and cattle raisers and all the food producers, agricultural and cattle breeding and water. These elements are far from changing what food production model we have to consider. It's lagging behind the energy production and lagging behind the industrial energy production. I think that the industrial production actually did consider that they have to follow a different way, and something is being done in that respect, but also in energy production. But cattle breeding and agricultural activities are not close to observing these new possibilities. Thank you. We heard about the electric cars, and in the last few years, I've been in some European Union and forums talking about the car industry in Europe. And I would briefly like to say that there are two big questions here. The first one is that the European industry is, lagging behind the electrification processes. You can tell now when we see the problems we have with batteries. This is a fact. It's a reality. That's part of the European industry, and the delay with which policies of the Green Deal reached us. I was speaking Catalan, and we heard that I needed to talk to Spanish. Well, point number two, which is relevant and to me it's the most important, and that turns into a question. The European Green Deal is a framework of industrial policies, changing models, etc., as we heard. But what we don't have is a European policy. And there's where we have conflicts of competitiveness exist amongst companies and national interests. There is no industrial European policy as such. To me, this is the big question in that respect currently that should be observed by the European Green Deal. How do we design a European policy, not only in the car industry, but also in all economic sectors where fair transition is feasible? Because sometimes what's feasible and fair for you is not good for somebody else. So there is no homogeneity in the industrial policies. Thank you. Well, my apologies. I had to leave and answer a phone call. I had to do it. I'm sorry. She says, well, the electric vehicles, well, it's a topic that deserves one or several work sessions. And the situation we are in right now comes from the decisions of the past or the non-decisions of the past. So the first responsibility of not having European electric vehicles at a feasible cost, well, are the European producers that for many years have boycotted the technology, betting for high-range electric vehicles where they get the highest benefit, not what the best was for the best for society, but the best for them. And I understand that the debate of fostering the use of electric vehicles versus other types of mobility. Well, here we see a contradiction that we will all agree on: less cars, more sustainable mobility. But emissions, the only way we have to drastically reduce emissions to fulfill a minimum of goals is to electrify cars, an important part of all of our vehicles. We either change the model or reduce emissions, and its debate comes from old decisions, incorrect decisions, probably. Totally agree with your position. It's badly managed, definitely, absolutely true. Well, why there are no proposals in the farming industry? Well, they have a very big, or the biggest budget in Europe. It affects 5-10% of the European population. We cannot have a common agricultural policy with common interests, but there is no clear proposal of decarbonization. There's a political fear to the reaction, as we could see, considering the reactions. Well, transition has not been easy. We've seen the process of closing of thermonuclear energy plants. Well, but decarbonization has costed many votes. Now we have to decarbonize home by home, homes, cars. It's a level of capillarity of decarbonization that, yes or yes, this will have some technical problems, regulatory problems, public policies, you name it. This is the complexity that we don't realize, because it's practically renewing buildings means knocking on each individual door. And another question that I wouldn't like to forget about, the electric vehicles and the debate about cars and cities touches a key element of our society, what cars meant with respect to status, etc. You're touching the core of the patriarchy, and this may sound strange, but both cars and meat are two examples of masculinity in the Western world, and there are two elements that every time we talk about this, the belligerence with which people answer has to do with an anthropological and patriarchal issue that should be considered as well. I totally agree. I totally agree with this. Electric vehicles. Well, the problem is mobility. You cannot substitute a fossil fuel car with an electric car, because we have to change the way in which we organize mobility. Cars, 90% of the time, are parked. We don't use them all the time. We have to find other formulae so that we do not need a car for every person. And the problem is not private cars. The problem is with road transport. The problem, very important problem we have in this country to reduce emissions is road transport, because 96% of all road transport is dumped on trucks. Very clearly, very obviously. Second, when the European Green Deal was observed, it included an economic component so that Europe could lead many of the technologies that had to be the gate for the universal transformation. That was it. In that respect, we have had sectors in which we've been able to have and see answers, but in others not. It was not an environmental bet only. It was an economic proposal mainly. I believe that this is quite clear, isn't it? We cannot have a transformation without such social justice. Social justice has to do with citizens. We can't implement wind or photovoltaic facilities, and people who are next town do not know about this. People have to be informed. We have to create other types of governance so that people understand the reason why things happen, so that later on they can be the beneficiaries of those facilities and policies. Not so difficult to do. It should be elements that can be shared, as Rosa said before, with respect to another fundamental element that has to do with energy efficiency in our buildings. We have progressed in respect. Next year, we'll have many more changes, positive changes, because we have many projects of recuperation plans that will be developed next year, 2025. This is fundamental. People see a cause-effect relation. They will see how a change in some areas will mean that they will be saving a bunch of euros in heating and air conditioning. These are the elements that we have to juggle with. And another element that maybe we didn't talk about, this is killing us, man. This is a healthcare problem. The emissions increase, problems related with climate change still grow. The health status of citizens, rainfall, heat waves. I am the responsible person of healthcare in my union. So we have elements that are more tangible and others that are less tangible, but we have to combine them. And we have to tell society, generating a great deal of pedagogy, very humbly, but firmly at the same time, because things, unless we approach them properly, will find complicated moments that will not be easy to revert. The reports of the experts in the United Nations say that if we don't reduce the greenhouse effect gases, we won't have the possibility of reverting the effects that we already have. Thank you. Well, quite the same. Most things have been said, fantastic interventions. I was going to blame the European car manufacturers. They've been developing a short-term and crazy set of policies. Short-term means competing against China. I don't know how they will get out of this fight while being alive. It's a matter of lack of previous decisions, correct decisions. This debate that in ecology, well, is quite often, it happens quite often. We need maybe a transition to another transport or mobility model. We have to defend that. But I agree with Rosa that in many Western countries, the greatest source of greenhouse effect gases is mobility and private mobility. And if we want to reduce this, electrification is a key element in the process. I think we have to bet for the two things with great intensity, even though this won't solve things like urban design, which is totally focused on cars and traffic. And no matter if they are electric or regular, well, electrification has many advantages because greenhouse effect gases, pollution, etc., are the main causes of mortality and death in cities. The problem of noise, which is another source of conflicts and mortality. Gizmo Collective has reports about this, the effect of noise in the health status of people and the energy dependence with third countries. Many countries spend lots of currencies in fossil fuels that could be used buying other things. So electrifying cars would have a different mineral dependence. We don't have oil, we don't have mineral resources in Europe. We don't have any of that. Would be changing one thing for the other, but on a long-term basis, the change would be very beneficial. And I think that, as we heard before, the main problem has two legs. The institutional design of the European Union, which is prone to having conflicting interests. One of the reports is the final element, which is how to reform the governance to do what we are trying to achieve. They have interesting proposals that are realistic in the sense that these are small changes that could be advantageous. We have to try to do these small changes to avoid vetoes and to advance towards a European industrial policy. We have other elements that have a more ideological component. If you see what the European leaders will say when they go to European fora, well, they say they are the last honest international neoliberals. The rest are playing dirty and they cannot compete against them. These are self-imposed limitations that should be easy to overcome. But for the moment, we are still at a moment of indecision if compared with the US, China, or other big countries. I believe this is an excellent example of the isolation, because once you go down to the more sectorial and focused transitions, you'll see problems of social trust, trust in the proposals made, the benefits that will be generated in those communities of people that should be the beneficiaries. These are things that you sometimes cannot touch with your hands because they are intangible. But let me insist on the fact that say that beyond implementing these new laws and policies, we have to invest in forms of organization generating a meaning in social movements, that elements that can, have a place in the political struggles, tough struggles, because right now, reactionary and far right policies have a control over communication means. It's the neoliberal socialization that we're living ill, and that gives them a competitive advantage in all these conflicts. The atomization, the lack of trust generated in those more collective solutions. So we have to invest in that kind of elements of generation in the transition, because no matter how many laws we can implement, we'll continue losing our fights, and we won't really know why. This is one of the main weak points we have right now. Your turn, I think.
Thank you. I'll try to add a few things. So I agree with what was just said, and I definitely agree that it's a lot about having a lack of cohesion and collaboration between policy fields, as well as a lack of resources, right? And I think a few recommendations that we have made on also improving this, because it's a governance issue. It's a governance issue of having green policy out without having economic and social policy involved, and it's a governance issue of having social or economic policy out without having green and ecological policy involved. So I think improving knowledge and awareness of transition need across the EU via a whole of society and a whole of economy approach is a key item for the next legislation. And in that sense, at the EU level, there is a fair transition observatory being launched, which will actually be helpful, I think, in a way of gathering the data where there is transition needs and which policy domains are involved, and maybe also giving advice to specific services in the Commission and at the EU level of where they need to focus policy towards. Second one would be to put in place more stronger and clearer obligations around environmental and social conditionalities together. So again, here it is merging two policy domains and making sure that when indeed we have a transition goal of reducing cars or reducing fossil fuel cars, but also cars is equally important in that sense. So it is not just about duplicating our fossil fuel economy. It is about transitioning, or rather transforming, to a clean economy and a clean society without repeating the mistakes from the past, and without indeed repeating the reliance on systems that are just not working and that are not sustainable and do not make sense within planetary boundaries. I very much agree with Rosa in that sense that it is about mobility, and it is about really looking at the granular data and seeing what is needed for which kind of local entity, and thereby not looking at a car as such, or electric car, but at the whole mobility question, or at the whole mobility question together, with mobility, urban planning policy, rural policy, economic policy, social policy, and environmental policy. And then, yeah, the securing sufficient and targeted funding. I think there is still a very big question mark that we see now, and I will stop with that, around the multi-annual financial framework of the EU, which is the long-term budget that is being planned. And we will have a new one in 2027, if I'm not mistaken. Where the question is really big also for industry. We might have by then a clean industrial deal, which I expect to be a bigger strategy around industrial policy, but without any financing and without, for example, the Next Generation EU, because that's also going to an end in 2026. There is just no industrial policy, right? Because then Germany does what they want, and France do what they want, and all the others sit somewhere in between. So we need also really to tackle this question of funding as a very strong pillar of this industrial policy and of the question of the car industry, but also much beyond that, of the whole transition economy. So yeah, funding, data, and coherence and coverage would be my key topics to focus on for the next years, considering the questions that were asked. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I was committed to finishing at 8 o'clock the latest, and it's 7:59. I'd like to thank you all. Taube, thank you so much. I know it's more complex for you because you are connected from far, far away. Thank you for your contribution. I think the three of you, you've complemented each other with your comments. And shortly, we'll tell you more about the future debate we'll be holding here. Thank you, and have a great night.
Thank you.